So basically, the the Houthis are this uh, militia or military organization in Yemen, and they're backed by Iran. And so, like recently, once after October 7th happened in the recent conflict in Gaza, happened. Basically, the Houthis in the Red Sea, they began like targeting ships, and they announced their support of like Hamas. And initially, they were only targeting like ships that were like either Israeli owned or had like were bringing goods in or out of Israel, or like things like that, basically that were just associated with Israel. But then, as time went on, they eventually began like attacking ships that had nothing to do with like Israel, from all and that were associated with all different, multiple different kinds of nations. And then eventually, like the U.S. gave them like a warning to stop, and then they proceeded to like attack these like Houthi military installations that were targeting like ships with strikes on January 12th. And so that's basically the situation. How do we feel about what the Houthis are doing? The U.S. response.
So my take on what the Houthis are doing, it's like, okay, so I mean, the first thing is, okay, I mean, there's a bunch of different questions. We can ask, are is it okay for the Houthis to do what they're doing? Is it morally defensible or justifiable, the course of action that the Houthis decided to take by starting to interfere with the Red Sea and whatnot and international maritime trade? Then there's the question of, is it justified for the US to respond by attacking the Houthis? Um,
Bro's really
and
gonna
you know,
start telling us what all the possible questions are.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Look, there's
Uh,
so many questions. I mean, there's so many I could answer. Infinitely many.
yeah. There's like a thousand different things to ask about this. But no, I mean so I mean, okay, so in terms of whether it was okay for the Houthis to do what they did, I mean, the obvious argument in favor of what the Houthis are doing is that they are creating substantial pressure on a power which is currently carrying out an atrocity, to stop carrying out that atrocity. And then the obvious argument against what the Houthis are currently doing is that basically by interfering with international maritime trade, you're severely disrupting the world economy, which, results in higher prices, higher costs of transport, which wouldn't be such a big deal if we were just talking about like, oh, my, like Funko Pops are like $5 more now, or, just kind of like superfluous consumer goods are a bit more expensive than they were. But in fact, the disruption of the global economy results in kind of severe suffering for especially like developing economies, like economies in Asia and the Middle East. So it actually causes a severe
Yeah.
harm.
Yeah.
So, just to quote really quickly an article from The Economist, titled "The Middle East Faces Economic Chaos." Quote, "For some of the countries bordering the Red Sea, Houthi missile strikes have far worse consequences. Eritrea's economy is propped up by fishing, farming, and mining exports, all of which travel by sea owing to tense relations with its neighbors. For crisis-stricken Sudan, the Red Sea is the sole point of entry for aid, almost none of which has reached the 24.8 million people in need of it since the attacks began. Further disruption could visit financial ruin on Egypt, one of the region's biggest countries. For its population of 10 million people, the Red Sea is a vital source of dollars. Its government earned $9 billion in the year to June from tolls on the Suez Canal, which links the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Without the toll revenue, Egypt's central bank would have run out of foreign exchange reserves, which stood at $16 billion at the start of 2023. The point is that the actions that the Houthis are taking actually have pretty severe
Mhm.
consequences for less
Yeah.
developed countries and their economies.
Yeah.
And so even though there is a legitimate purpose to what they're doing, which is to pressure Israel to stop a massacre,
Mhm.
it's very likely still unjustified for them to try to stop that in the way that
Mhm.
they're trying to stop it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just some like things to add like context to what you said. Like actually, like it seems like Egypt. I've read some like estimates like showing that it's actually suffering like worse, or it's being more so hit by this than Israel, in fact. And then like for instance, like to give you a picture of like what exactly they're interfering with, like 12% of all global trade, I think passes through this passage through the Red Sea. Now, obviously, you can like reroute it, but the thing is that's like costlier and it takes more time, which obviously like is going to lead to a supply issue and like higher prices in goods. And I think like I've seen economists like project it could be up. It could result in like a reasonably could result in a like a 0.7% increase in inflation globally. And then I guess aside from like these things we're highlighting, which is like what is the impact on like other countries, in the global economy, I think also it's like questionable whether what they're like doing actually has like a significant effect on Israel. So like if we think about it, like what is it going to do? Well, it's going to like result in like delayed goods and like higher prices, but like will that actually like on the Israeli population, will that effect on the Israeli population actually result or likely result, in some like significant change in the Israeli leaders' policy? And I think like that's like very questionable. I mean, just theoretically, like the fact that this population like is suffering, as they like engage in this like war that a lot of them support, it could potentially create a rally around the flag effect where they
Mhm.
like because they're in a time of crisis, they support the current government's actions even more. That's like one plausible outcome. And in general, I think like the evidence of like different types of like sort of economic warfare, you could call it, on like the foreign policy decisions of leaders is like quite mixed, and like there's lots of cases of it not being effective, though it does depend on the specific type. So I think like if we're skeptical that it actually does have any sizable effect on Israeli policy, and we certainly like haven't seen any like so far, then I think once you take that into account and then take into account the effects on like the global economy on relatively innocent nations, I think like it seems reasonable to me to say that the way they're going about trying to pressure Israel is not justified, or at least their actions in general here,
Yeah,
the
and I
way
mean,
they're going about them are not justified.
a kind of related point to that is just like, in terms of the logic of the what the Houthis are doing, it's kind of like, okay, well, by inflicting some economic harm on Israel and then saying, we'll stop inflicting this
Mhm,
harm on you, conditional on you ending this massacre, you're kind of adding an extra benefit, an extra incentive from Israel's perspective to end the massacre. But then at the same time, you're kind of imposing an extra cost now, which is that now if Israel stops the war in response to this happening, they kind of got bitched by the Houthis,
mhm, yeah,
and like very plausibly, like Israel explicitly doesn't want that. Israel historically cares very much about its deterrence capacity. In other words, it cares very much about the extent to which surrounding countries understand that I can't fuck with Israel and get away with it,
mhm,
basically. And so, if they let the Houthis, uh, you know, force them to stop the invasion of Gaza, that's seems like a massive blow to Israel's deterrence capacity.
mhm,
So presumably they won't want that to happen. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's very dubious as to whether what the Houthis are doing is actually like strategically sound and helps in
mhm,
terms of helping Gazans, and it certainly
yeah,
causes a lot of suffering for surrounding relatively, like you said, innocent countries.
mhm,
Yeah, I mean, maybe one thing to add here is just that for the leftist commentators I know who do seem supportive of this, it seems to indicate to me that their commitment to helping like the globally most in need um, is well, it's either principally inconsistent or they're just not that well informed about the sort of impact of these policies. I think that because the massacre in Gaza is such a big news story, everybody's aware of that and wants to end it. But things like the effect on the Sudanese population is less publicized. So I wonder if people just don't know or just like don't care enough. But yeah, it seems like sort of a strange reaction to be very much in support of this if there are these other fairly innocent populations that are badly harmed.
Well, it's
could
also
you
just like
oh,
like
sorry, go ahead.
deaths caused by a massacre carried out by the Israeli military are also just kind of more like visceral than like deaths caused by like increased prices due to a disruption in maritime trade. So it's like, kind of makes
Yeah.
sense that
Yeah, no,
people are a
that's
bit
true.
more upset about the former as well.
Since we agree, like it's like pretty dubious whether it has like uh, little, if any, effect at all on the Israeli military decisions to continue their invasion in Gaza, and we agree that it's like causing quite a bit of suffering to innocent third parties. What do we think about like the U.S.'s? Obviously, we all agree like it would be good if the U.S. like stop, put pressure on Israel to stop like what they're doing in Gaza right now. But given that that's unlikely, what do we think about the U.S.'s response by targeting Houthi military installations that are striking at these ships and stuff? Do
I
we think
mean,
it's like justified or
I
not?
sorry, go
mean,
ahead.
one issue is that you might just wonder about how effective the U.S. military response is. And in terms
Mhm,
of political effects, it seems to have almost none. As far as I can tell, I think the Houthis are still
mhm,
posturing about continuing to attack shipping, etc. Um, and then I think the question that I know less about is, well, maybe even if the Houthis want to continue attacking, has this degraded the military capability sufficiently that it's actually much more difficult? I don't know, but I would suspect that if neither of those things are going to happen, then it seems like the intervention is not that effective.
yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. That seems obviously true.
I mean, yeah, I mean, there is, I guess, some question about how effective the US response has been, and then there's some question of, okay, if this isn't enough, how far would it be reasonable to go um, in order to stop the Houthis from doing what they're doing? Um, at least like in principle, aside from, because we'd have to see like, okay, what would actually be required militarily in order to apply enough force on the Houthis such that they're likely to stop doing what they're doing, and then what are kind of the second order effects and risks of a strategy that extreme? Does doing whatever is required substantially heighten the risk of like a regional war involving Iran and so on?
Mhm,
Um, so, that's all worth considering.
mhm.
And, I'd have to consider it a bit more to come to a view on a lot of that stuff. But, I mean, like, in principle, insofar as US military action can stop the Houthis from doing what they're doing without, like, severely, catastrophic or, harmful sort of second order effects. I mean, my general position is just that, like, like, begrudgingly, I guess it's better, like, conditional on us not pressuring Israel to stop the massacre. I guess it's better for the US to um, stop the Houthis from doing what they're doing with violence, assuming it's relatively low cost, than it would be for them to not do that. But, all things considered, in terms of just assessing the question of like, uh, whether the US attack on the Houthis is justified or whether we should support the attack on Yemen, all things considered, in the context in which they're going on. I mean, I think that, basically it shouldn't be supported, just because, essentially anytime you have a choice between solving a problem by starting a war and solving a problem by doing something that you should be doing anyways, like pressuring Israel to stop a massacre, then you ought to pick the latter method of stopping the fight. Um, and so, insofar as stopping the Houthis from doing what they're doing by ending the massacre in Gaza
Mhm.
is something that the US could do, but which they're refraining from doing, then it's wrong for them to attack the Houthis,
Uh,
basically, would be my view.
I guess like I think this is relevant to this point. The basically the Houthis like stop attacking ships uh, when there are like ceasefires, basically in the or lulls in the current conflict between Israel and Gaza. So that would
Mhm.
be like some evidence that maybe like if the U.S. actually did like put pressure on Israel and it led to things like ceasefires or negotiations, the Houthis that could have an effect on the Houthis like stopping their attacks.
Right, and they've just declared that we're doing this because of the massacre in Gaza, and if that
Yes.
stops, then we'll stop. So they've said it. Their actions seem to be in line with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it seems Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't particularly like disagree. I think like if you know you have the choice, like you have the option to do like either of those things. Like it's preferable to do to put pressure on Israel, and if they're not doing that, that is you know I think like a bad choice on the U.S.'s part.
There's
But
a
I do agree that like in the case where they don't you know do choose the better option or whatever, so we know they're not going to, and you have to choose between like doing nothing basically or like some military attack. Given that it's at least somewhat effective, I think the military attack is fine. It's like the second best option.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Uh,
think that, and so on the point that I was, making and that, you were kind of, also hinting at, or you were also kind of getting at. I mean, so there was an interesting article by Philosophy Bear on Substack.
Who?
Uh, Philosophy, you don't follow Philosophy Bear?
Oh, and you
No.
wait, you take
So
them
like that's one of the
seriously?
worst.
You take
That's
them
They're
one of
all
the
right.
seriously,
worst.
and you're not going to take Bruh Machine seriously? Get out of here.
Wait. That's
Yeah,
one of the worst names I've ever heard.
bro.
If they're not gay,
Unironically.
that's like appropriation. Like if they're like a big fat gay man, it's okay. Otherwise, that's not okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a fair
One,
point.
legit,
Anyways,
that's one of the most awful names I've ever heard in a while.
Philosophy Bear made the following. The fol or sorry, Philosophy Bear presented the following thought experiment in a recent article. And it goes as follows. Basically, there's an alphabetical names convention. Alfred is the strongest person at the convention. Bob is Alfred's favorite. Bob and Charlie fight all the time, and Bob is much stronger than Charlie. Denise likes Charlie and doesn't want him to get beaten up. So Bob is beating up Charlie. Some people even think that he might be going to kill Charlie because the beating is getting so severe as time drags on. His actions are, by hypothesis, deeply immoral. Alfred chooses not to stop Bob, and in fact, Alfred helps Bob as he beats up Charlie. And so Denise, in order to try and protect Charlie, starts throwing things at anybody nearby since she can't directly intervene in the fight. So she kind of just starts throwing objects in the general vicinity to kind of try and stop Charlie from getting beaten up. Now, Alfred wants to restore order in the room, right? So, what should Alfred do? Should Alfred force Bob to stop attacking Charlie, or should Alfred basically start attacking Denise so that Denise stops throwing shit and less people get hurt by the whole situation? And like, it seems obvious that the right thing to do is to force Bob to stop attacking Charlie. And if what Alfred decides to do is to attack Denise because, okay, maybe I don't like that Charlie's getting beat up, but, throwing things at innocent people and harming innocent people is just an unacceptable course of action, so I'm going to start attacking Denise. If that's what Alfred decides to do, then it seems like Alfred has acted wrongly. Like, sure, it might be better than if he didn't do anything that he's attacking Denise. But, still the fact that he could have stopped the whole situation by saving Charlie from getting the shit kicked out of him, but decided not to, and instead decided to attack Denise, because of that, it seems that he's acted wrongly. And the idea is that we should say the same thing about the US military response to the Houthis, which I think
Bro,
is pretty plausible.
that shit was gay as fuck. But yeah.
Look,
Well, obviously,
Darren,
it was published
out
by
of,
Philosophy
out of
Bear on
curiosity,
Substack, dog.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, Michael, how would you feel if you didn't eat breakfast this morning?
Huh? Oh, I probably like feel pretty normal.
I
uh,
see.
I did eat breakfast. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the reason I think I'd like feel pretty normal is like I actually like just don't eat breakfast most of the time. So like I have inductive evidence that if I hadn't eaten breakfast this morning, I would have feel pretty fine.
Hmm.
Just what normally happens.
Wow. Any other thoughts?
I can't think of any.
I guess we could talk about how much the current situation raises our credence in the Jewish question.